Hey guys, I've had a couple of people reach out to me and ask me if I could do a refresh video on the paper piecing class that we did a couple weeks ago. Paper piecing is a skill that you're going to need to know in order to be able to make the next block of the month quilt that we're going to be starting in June. Um, so the way that I taught this class was I used this foundation paper uh, in order to walk you through the process of making a foundation paper piece block. And then once you learn the technique for paper piecing, you just repeat the process over and over again to make however many blocks that are in your particular quilt. Um, so this one that I chose here is the woven star. And when you open up this packet of the tablet that you got here, and you flip it over, the front page here gives you the fabric requirements that you need in order to complete this block and also how to cut each one of those. I'm going to walk you through the instructions on how to do the paper piecing, but before we do that, you will need to take your fabrics and cut your fabrics into the correct sizes. So what I did was I found a charm pack and I went over and I got some uh, fabrics out of my charm pack. I chose uh, for the dark fabrics, which if we look back on the picture here, all of the fabrics in here in the star make up the dark fabrics. So what I did was I chose 8 different fabrics that are going to make up the star points on my block, and then I chose a white background because I want the star to pop out on that light background. So once you look back over here, it tells you the sizes that you need to cut each one of your fabrics. So I chose 4 fabrics here that I made 2¼ by 4" rectangles. And I chose 4 fabrics here that I made 2¼ by 3" rectangles. So I have 8 different fabrics here. And then I also took, for the light fabrics, now this is the fabric that I'm using as the background. From the light fabrics, I cut 3¾ inch squares. And then I just took and cut those on the diagonal. So this is what I have after I cut those on the diagonal. I have 2 of those pieces. And then I also took a 3½ inch square, and I took 2 of those, and now I have 4 3½ inch pieces. Now, when you look in the book here, it says the placement here corresponds to the number that is on your paper. So I've got a copy of the block here. So where this says placements 1, that means that's where that piece of fabric is going to go on your quilt block. Placement 2 is going to be one of your 2¼ by 3" rectangles. Placement 3 is going to be one of the 2¼ by 4" rectangles. Placement 4 and 5 are going to be one of the 3½ inch triangles that you cut. So what I did was I ripped one of these papers out of my book, and this is what you start with. But in order to get this down into some manageable chunks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this down into quarters. So if you look on your paper here, you see where it says first trim line, and it is that bold perforated line that runs through the center of the paper. That is the line that you're going to trim on. So you're going to trim here, and then you're going to trim here. So once you do that, this is what you're going to have. So again, I have just cut on that bold perforated line that was in the center. And so now I've got this down into smaller chunks. It's going to be a little bit easier for me to work with. Okay, so I'm going to leave one of these on my table, and I'm just going to work with one chunk at a time. Okay, and I'm going to go back and I am going to reference here where it tells me for placement 1, I'm going to be using one of the 3 3/4 squares that I cut once on the diagonal. So that's this piece of fabric right here. So that's my white fabric. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to take my white fabric and I'm going to put it down here on my table. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my foundation paper and I'm going to put it on top of it. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I am looking to see that I have a little bit of fabric overlap around each side, because that's going to become the seam allowance that I'm going to need in order to sew my next pieces on. So as you can see here, I have a light table that I'm using here, but you can see that I've got overhang past this triangle shape that's here. So I've got fabric that's overhanging there. So what I'm going to do in order to keep that piece stable while I'm adding pieces and sewing, I'm going to grab my glue stick and I'm going to put a little dot of glue right there. And I'm going to take my paper and put it back down over top. And all that's going to do is that's going to secure that. That's going to secure that for me in that spot so it doesn't move while I'm trying to add pieces onto my block. Let me grab. Okay, so now what I need to do, I've added my first piece on here. And now what I need to do is I need to add on piece number 2. We're going to be working in order. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So as long as you can count, you're just going to keep going in order to add the pieces onto the block. So in order to do that, you are going to need to make sure that you have your add a quarter ruler. And I know some of you have them, some that are a little bit smaller than this one. I have one that's longer. It doesn't matter. They're fine for doing this. But you're going to need to use the add a quarter ruler. Now, if you look back on your tablet here, for placement 2, they're telling me that I need one of the 2 1/4 by 3 inch rectangles. So I'm going to come over here to one of these smaller pieces and I'm going to choose one. So I'm just going to choose this green here. And that is the piece that is going to go on placement number 2. Now, in order to add piece number 2, what I need to do is I'm just taking a straight edge here and I am folding my paper back and I'm creasing it right on this line here between 1 and 2. So this line right here, I'm just folding my paper over and I'm making a crease, and I'm just using this straight edge of the card here to help me get a good crease in it. Now, once I do that, I'm pulling away my straight edge and I'm keeping that crease there. And this is where I'm going to bring in my add a quarter ruler. My add a quarter ruler has a thicker lip here on the side. If you put your hand under it, you can feel there's a little lip there. What you're going to do is you're going to take that lip and you are going to push it snug up against the side of that fold. So we just made this fold right here. we're going to take the lip of this ruler and we're going to butt it up against the side of that fold. Now you can see here, I have a little bit of fabric overhang. And what I want to do is I want to get rid of that because it's going to make a nice straight edge for me to add my other pieces on. So once I pull my ruler away, you see that I have a nice straight edge here, and I've got a seam allowance that I can join my next piece of fabric on. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my piece here that I'm going to be putting in on piece number and placement number 2. And I'm going to leave my fabric here right side up on the table. So this is the pretty side. I want to make sure that I'm leaving the fabric right side up. So I'm going to take my piece here and I am going to lay it on top. Now I'm going to be taking the raw edges of this piece that I just cut here, and I'm going to be matching it to the raw edges of this 2 1/4 by 3 inch piece that I cut. Okay. So I am going to take this and I'm going to match the edges here. And then I'm going to pull my paper down and I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew on this line. So you can see right here, and I'm going to get a pencil point because it'll make it a little bit easier to see. You can see on here that there's a dot right here. So what you're going to do is you're going to use this line right here as your sewing line. So there's no guesswork on, do I need to do 1/4 of an inch or, trying to figure that out. All you need to do is start here where this dot is, do a back stitch, then sew along here, and then stop right here at this intersection. And I would say do a couple of back stitches there as well, because as we start sewing this and pulling the papers out, you're going to want to make sure that you've got secure stitches there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew from here to here. And then I'm going to show you what that looks like and how we add on to the next piece. Okay, so what I've done is I went over to my sewing machine and I sewed on this line right here between the 1 and the 2. So this dot right here is where I started my stitching. I made a back stitch and then I sewed all the way here and then made another back stitch. Okay, so once I flip my paper over, this is what I have now. So I know it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but I've got my white background fabric here, and I've got this 2 1/4 by 3 inch rectangle that I added on. So I've added 2 pieces on now, and now what I need to do is I need to work on adding on piece 3. So if I refer back to my tablet here, I am looking for where it says placement 3. So for placement 3, that means I need one of the 2 1/4 by 4 inch rectangles. So I am going to just come over here and I'm going to randomly choose one of the rectangles that I have here that I've already cut out, and I'm going to place that in this this area right here for number 3. So again, before I add on piece number 3, I need to come in here and I need to trim down the fabric so I can add on to that piece. So just as I took my paper here and I folded it on 1 and 2, and then I sewed that down, I am going to, I've got a line here between 1 and 3. So I am going to take my straight edge here, my card, and I'm going to fold my paper back on that line. So you see this line right here. That is my fold line that I'm folding back on. So I'm taking this, folding it over, and I'm making a nice crease here. Okay, so once I do that, that's where I get my add a quarter ruler in again. And I'm going to butt this edge up against the fold of this paper. And you can see the excess here that I'm going to trim off. So I'm trimming off my excess here. So now this is what I have. If I open my paper up again and I flip it over, this is what I have. It's looking a little more clean cut, but I still have to finish adding my pieces on. So now I'm going to turn it back over. I've got my next piece that I'm going to add on, and I'm going to leave it right side up on the table. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to keep this edge folded over here, and I am going to bring this over, and I am going to match the raw edges of the fabrics together. Now again, this piece is right side up on your table. I'm taking my paper here that I'm working on, and I'm putting it right sides together here. So I'm matching these raw edges here. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my sewing machine. And again, where this dot is right here, you see this dark dot here, I am going to sew from here to here. So from here to here, I want to take a couple back stitches, sew along this line here, and then take a couple back stitches here. And I'm going to do that real quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, you can finger press these down or, iron these down. I iron them down because I think it gives a little bit more of a crisp look. But as you can see right now, what I've done is I have sewn between 2 and 3. So I've taken my sewing machine and I've sewn here. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add on piece 4. So in order to add on piece 4, I need to make another straight edge to add that fabric on. So when I go back to my book, I want to look to see what size fabric I need for placement 4 and 5. So it's the same thing. So I need a 3.5 inch square that was cut on the diagonal. So basically that means it's these triangle pieces here, they're going to be going in places 4 and 5. But before I add those on, I want to make sure that I have got a nice straight edge to do that. So I've sewn on pieces 1, 2, 3. I want to add on piece 4. So I need to fold the paper back on this line here between 3 and 4 and trim the fabrics here so I have an edge to sew on this triangle. So I'm going to stick my straight edge here, and I'm going to fold my paper back on this line and get a nice crease in there. So I'm folding folding on this line right here. So once I have that crease here, I'm going to get my add a quarter ruler. I'm going to butt the edge up here, and you can see I've got a bunch of excess to trim off here. So I'm going to trim this excess off. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to add on, again, I've got my paper right sides together. I want to position this so that when I open this up, it's covering this shape. So make sure that you have your triangles pointed in the correct direction in order, so once you open it up, that it's covering the shape. So if you have your triangle put down like this, take your fabric, you're going to match your raw edges here. Now I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and you see where these circle, there's a circle here, a dark dot here, and a dark dot here. I'm going to sew between each one of those lines, back stitching at each end. Okay, so I've added on piece number 4. I flip it over. You can see I've got pieces 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I need to add on piece 5. So I'm going to flip back over to my numbered side. And to add on piece 5 here, I am going to fold my paper back on this line right here. I'm going to make a nice crease in my paper. I'm going to take my add a quarter ruler. I'm going to butt it up against the edge, trim the sides here, and then I'm going to add on my piece number 5. So again, I want to make sure that I have it positioned correctly, so then when I open it up, that my fabric is pointing in the correct direction. Because if you sew it on like this, you're not going to get, it's not going to cover that paper. So you want to make sure that you've got it positioned so that when it does open up, you're opening it up so that you can, it's covering that piece of paper. So I'm going to take my triangle, I'm going to put it here. I'm going to match, again, my raw edges here with the raw edges of my triangle. I'm going to put those together. I'm going to come over to my sewing machine. Okay, so now that I've got all of the pieces sewn on, this is what I have. So when I flip it over, it's starting to look kind of, it's kind of pretty good. So this is going to be one part of the 4 parts that we're making. So all you're going to do is repeat this process to make the other 3 triangles of this, and then we're going to take and sew them all together to make the one triangle. But before we do this, if you flip this back over, you are going to see where it says first trim line. So before you take once you get all of your triangles made, before you sew them together, you're going to need to come back here and you're going to need to trim the excess off. So where it says first trim line here, that's this line from here to here. You're going to butt your ruler up against the edge of that line here. And you're going to trim. So now I have this nice straight edge here. So I need to repeat the same thing here. Now you just need to make sure that when you're cutting on the correct line. You don't want to cut on the sewing line. This dotted line is the sewing line. You want to cut on this dark line here where it just says first trim line. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to put my ruler here, and I am going to trim on this side. Get a little moving there. Okay, so now I have a part of my triangle that is ready to be added on to the other triangles once they get them all made. So that is the process for doing paper piecing. You are just going to repeat that same process over and over again until you make one full complete block.